I love the forest, and I don't see how anyone couldn't. The chirping of the birds and the rustling of leaves drew me like a fly to honey. A poet once said, "Man's soul lies within the trees," and I'd be inclined to agree. Near my home was a national park with plenty of trails, creeks, and caves, a beautiful place in the Daniel Boone National Forest, long stretches of nothing but nature and its beauty. I never understood some people's fear or hate of the woods. Until a few months ago. A cold April morning, I was off to work. For the first time in my busy life for the past few months, I didn't have to commute to Louisville. I could stay in my small town and enjoy the bachelor life as best I could. I went out onto the trail that morning, athletic shorts and a t-shirt, embracing the cold air rather than being opposed to it. I set out on the paved gravel trail from the parking lot, up past the yellow upon brown sign welcoming you to the National Forest. The parking lot behind me was pretty empty that morning. One or two cars on the far side, a park ranger's Crown Vic. I was glad to know I'd have the trail mostly to myself, and so I broke out into a jog. Earbuds set in and the volume pumped up. The trees breezily shook in the morning air, and the sun clouded out. Overcast, maybe rain later. I huffed and shook my head, continuing on down the trail. I passed another jogger at one point, and we shared waves, but I saw no one else for a while. I think half an hour passed, judging by how many songs I'd cycled through, till I came up to Big Bend Fork, a split in the trail leading up two different paths. One path was a little more overgrown, and I'd already been up there a few times. It led past an old grill and bench, along with an abandoned power box shack, which had since been transferred to the other path, my normal one, which went past some campgrounds and a fishing dock. However, to my surprise, a park ranger was there, armed, what looked like a tranquilizer rifle in his hands. He seemed to be guarding the trail and keeping an eye out. I stopped my jog and took the earbuds out and asked him what exactly was wrong. Luckily, it wasn't anything too scary. A few large bears had been spotted wandering around in a mother and father and cubs. They'd ripped up a vacant tent of another hiker. Now, black bears aren't the most dangerous bears in the world, not at all. But with cubs, the parents can tend to be very protective. Better safe than sorry, the ranger told me, and that the trail should reopen the next day when they could relocate the bears deeper into the woods. Another ranger had headed up the second path and reported nothing abnormal, so he assured me it was safe. The path that way was shorter and would probably let me finish my jog before the rain came, and I had no choice. I jogged along the other path and up into the more overgrown part of the park and hoped the storms would be delayed long enough for me to finish my jogging routine. Another half hour or so along the gravel path. The grass is starting to overcome it further on up. You clearly saw some level of neglect, that much was clear. I reached the rusty bench and felt my legs begin to give out, so it was time for a break. I slowed my pace down and walked off the trail to the bench, taking a seat and giving my body a rest. My head tilted up to the sky, and I shut my eyes, lost in the world of 80s music. I'm not sure how long I sat there, but after a while I started to smell something. Something wafted over to me, and I couldn't fully tell what it was, and it seemed to be coming from further up the trail, near the power shed. Whatever it was, I hopped off of the bench, begrudgingly, stretching out and doing a few toe touches before continuing up the trail. The smell became more pervasive as I made my way further up, and I started seeing some kind of material along the trail. Bits of red and black and a little bit of gray. Strewn along the sides of the trail in odd patterns, I stopped and picked a few pieces up. They were pieces of tarp. Maybe from that fence? It would make sense. They continued up the grassy trail towards the distant power shed. Something told me not to check, that it may be the bears, but I knew there was another ranger out here, and so I carried on. The smell got way worse, and I could see red spray on the grass, reddishness over parts of the tarp leading up to the old rusty cream-colored shed building. I could tell from the trail that the shed door was open, and that the trail of this paint, or God, whatever it was, I was hoping it wouldn't be blood. And I thought, well, I followed it. I broke off the trail and I walked up to the shack, which itself had a small gravel trail and a sign on the wall reading "Keep Out," rusted and grimy. The smell was unbearable by now, and I could see what it was. Behind the shed, off to an angle I couldn't see from the trail, was a large, black, hairy body, and fat and animal-like. It was ripped open, flies were massing around it. I clasped a hand over my mouth, holding back the urge to vomit. I got a better view of it as I closed in on the shed, and could tell its face, its skin there. Parts of it were ripped clean off, leaving bone and muscle and a little bit of flesh behind, but no skin. But the red trail didn't go to the bear. It went inside the shed. The door was open slightly to the shed. It wasn't very big, it wasn't very small. It just was made to hold a few power terminals and breaker boxes, and could hold maybe 8 or 9 men standing together. The smell got so bad. Flies were buzzing about as I got to the door. All my instincts were telling me to turn back, and I nearly did, until I heard a chewing noise. A chomping, spitting, chewing sound. A breathing, a shuddering, like a human. I thought someone may be getting attacked by an animal, and I couldn't just leave them. Not if they were in danger. So I pressed the door open real slow. Pale light from the outside beaming in, dust particles scattering from it. As more of the room was opened up and illuminated, the old power boxes and monitoring systems were dusty and destroyed and long since vandalized and abandoned. And the red trail continued on the floor, blackened and thick inside the shed, to a dark corner. I could make out a silhouette in the dark, something huddled or maybe sitting or laying. I couldn't tell. My hand remained over my mouth, and the smell absolutely was unbearable. I pushed the door all the way open, and the sounds of the chewing stopped. And as a wave of light rushed over from the open door, I so wished I hadn't been there. A man, but not a man, a humanoid, maybe, was sitting there. His palms were bloody and bony. Bare claws were shoved into his fingernails where nails had seemingly been ripped out. His body was pale and patchy with thick hair and what seemed to be fur. Some gray and falling out, some black and fresh. As I looked over his or its full body, I noticed then what gives me chills to this day. The bear's face was badly plastered over his own skull, his eyes pale and features gaunt. Bits and pieces of the mutilated bear attached to its own body, his nose ripped off and left with a poorly fitting black one of the bear I'd seen outside. Further in the corner behind him, the unmistakable off-violet uniform of a Kentucky Park Ranger, his legs, or what was left of them, stuck out, his chest completely torn open, his entrails hanging from the thing's fingers. A look of terror and of shock was solidified on his half-eaten face. The thing stared at me, head tilted in curiosity. I was absolutely silent, as it was, like we were locked into some kind of staring contest, like it was looking upon me with the same shock and awe I had looking upon it. Then it smiled. A toothy, bloody grin. Its mottled, yellow teeth jagged and barely fitting together. My blood went cold. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, but a sudden lightning strike and a rumble of that thunder from the coming storm broke the silence, and it startled me. I couldn't help but scream, losing my cool in that one moment. The creature didn't like that. He didn't like it at all. Maybe he perceived me as a threat, or as prey, but it let out a howl, an unnatural howl, and it lunged off the floor. I was startled, but I've been running and jogging since middle school, and as soon as that thing started moving, I took off in a sprint down that trail and back the way I came, away from that shed, away from whatever the hell was chasing me. But it screamed like a banshee and ran like one too. I could hear its footsteps right behind me, its bestial primordial grunts and screams as it pursued me. I lost all track of time as I ran, all sense of being. Adrenaline rushed through me, and I was on autopilot. I sprinted for what seemed like an eternity until I nearly reached the Big Bend Fort, and I looked behind me to see if I could still see it, but I couldn't, and I couldn't see anything behind me for the length of the trail. But I didn't see something in front of me either, and I tripped. I fell on something hard, but soft, fleshy and squishy, and immediately it felt very warm all across the front of my body and my face. Warm and uncomfortably slick. I struggled to stand, but my hands only met something squishy. A mass of wetness and disgusting, slimy surfaces. I sat up from whatever it was and could see only red. I wiped my eyes clean and then discovered I'd fallen onto the corpse of the park ranger on his back, his face ripped to absolute shreds, his abdomen torn open and half of his torso ripped off. I screamed louder than I ever had in my life, and I scrambled up to my feet standing over this mutilated corpse. And then I heard that familiar banshee cry from behind me, and I looked over my shoulder and that smell hit me again, the smell of that creature. And then I remembered. The rifle. Looked to the ground, and sure enough, the bloody rifle of the park ranger lay just off the trail. I grabbed it and checked it, and it was loaded, and it was an actual gun, not just some tranquilizing tool like I initially thought. Low caliber, but good enough for me. I aimed it up the trail just as that beast of a man was gaining distance on me. It looked more horrific in the open light, and I could see every vein, every patch of mottled and rotted flesh, the blood streaming from where it had attached the mutilated bare parts. I shut my eyes expecting death to be coming, and I pulled that trigger. A loud crack resonated throughout the forest. I don't know if I hit the thing or not, but I heard a howl. The rustling of leaves. I opened my eyes after a moment and looked ahead. It was gone. Nothing but me. Nothing beside me. Nothing behind me. Nothing in front of me. The rustling of bushes got quiet until there was absolute silence. Me, with this rifle, standing over a dead man. Utter silence. I stood there like a statue, rifle still aimed, finger on the trigger, and I waited. I thought it would ambush me. I thought it was waiting for me, but another rumble of thunder woke me from this frozen position. Then a sprinkle of rain began to fall, and without any further consideration of the situation, I took off running back down that trail. Minutes seemed like an eternity, and my body slowly gave out from the sprint, and I couldn't push myself any further. And soon I came into sight of the parking lot through the trees, and I mustered up my best jog to safety down the trail and out onto the pavement. But then I noticed it was no longer empty. 3 Rangers cruisers were parked in the wall-like fashion against the trail. I was panting and my vision was blurry as my body continued to recoil from the fierce push I'd put it through. But I remember seeing men behind the cars, black and white cars, weapons aimed at me. Were they police or rangers? Had someone called them here? I didn't know. I couldn't think. "Drop it" was the last clear phrase I heard before I collapsed to the pavement. The patter of rain on my blood-soaked clothing, the final thing I heard before it all faded away. And I blacked out entirely. I didn't sleep well nor feel well. Even when they let me out of the hospital I woke up in, because all that awaited me was a ride in the back of a state trooper's car to the local detention center. Details were fuzzy and it all seemed like a blur, but the looks I got from some of the troopers told me what I needed to know. I appeared in court not long after. 2 counts of first-degree murder of 2 Kentucky Park Rangers. They never found the bodies of the mangled bear nor the ranger in the shed, but with my clothes caked in blood and a crimson-spattered weapon in my hand, I was the only possible suspect to them. With the huge amount of blood found in the shed and 1 dead ranger left on the trail, I was to blame. I tried to plead my story. I wanted to, but even running it in my head sounded ridiculous. What? That a bear man had killed both men and I was only out for a jog? That my DNA was on the corpse of one and his blood was on me, but that was because I tripped and fell on him? An idiot might believe that, but sadly for me, the justice system wasn't as dumb as some people say it is. It's been 8 months since I was placed in this prison. 8 months that I've had to wear this jumpsuit and shit in an open toilet and shower in the public shower and eat this slop they give us. 8 months because of my curiosity and my love of jogging. They're still doing tests and trying to determine every possible factor, I've been told, but their search across the forest turned up no signs of the dead ranger. No other body to prove the case that I had nothing to do with the deaths of these men. Hell, they thought I was insane, with the trauma I had of that day showing through and my story of a monstrous bear man being the murderer. My assigned therapist told me I should write my thoughts down, even if I'm not insane. It still comforts me to write my story out. It comforts me to know that maybe, just maybe, I'll be proven innocent someday, and I'll get to be out of this place and back to a somewhat normal life. Even if that happens, I'll never go jogging in the woods again. That other man couldn't have killed the first ranger I met. He was at the shed. There are multiple things out there in those woods. Old things that maybe not even Appalachian folklore speaks of. Spooks and monsters existing as shadows among the trees. Howls at night. Shrieks in the early morning. Figures in the fog. The things grizzled hunters speak of while clutching a rifle to their sides. They're still out there. Word of advice to you: be careful what trails you go hiking on. You never know what you'll find.